By the 5th century, the administrative engine of the Western Roman Empire had ground to a halt. Trade routes dissolved, professional armies vanished, and the centuries-old systems that once governed millions collapsed. The disappearance of central authority left a vast political void. The Western continent splintered into a patchwork of competing tribal territories. Two major Germanic groups seized this territory. The Franks pushed westward into Gaul, while the Lombards drove southward into the Italian peninsula. The ruins of Rome offered a ready-made foundation of agriculture, roads, and cities. Whoever managed to reorganize these remnants effectively would draw the political map of the West for the next 1,000 years. At the starting line, these two factions looked remarkably alike. Both were martial tribal societies attempting to rule over massive populations of conquered Latin-speaking locals. Looking at the archaeological record, we see clear evidence of their shared background. These gold and garnet gravegods, daggers and buckles, show that both groups were led by a wealthy, highly sophisticated warrior aristocracy. Yet, despite starting with the same cultural DNA, they took entirely different paths. One group focused on building a unified state, while the other fractured, with local commanders turning their swords against one another. This divergence led to two opposing outcomes. One faction built the foundations of modern France and Germany, while the other would be conquered and absorbed, disappearing from the map as an independent power. The Franks chose rapid consolidation. Under early kings like Clovis, they used military force to absorb neighboring tribes and remove rival warlords, forging the scattered territories of Gaul into one single block of central authority. But military force was only the first step. Rather than isolating themselves as foreign conquerors, Frankish leadership integrated their new government directly with the existing Gallo-Roman elite, utilizing their administrative skills to manage taxation and agriculture. Beyond military force, the Franks moved to align themselves with the most stable institution left in the West, the Catholic Church. By securing the support of local bishops and the Pope, they tied their political authority to a religious mandate. By positioning themselves as the armed protectors of the Catholic faith, Frankish kings gained legitimacy in the eyes of their Roman subjects. To rebel against the king was to rebel against the Church, providing the monarchy with a stable foundation for their rule. South of the Alps, the Lombards had captured a significant prize. Under King Alboin, they invaded Italy and seized the geographic core of the old empire, a land filled with classical infrastructure and centuries of wealth. But where the Franks centralized, the Lombards decentralized. Almost immediately after arriving, they severed their new territory into two distinct halves, Langobardia Major in the north and Langobardia Minor in the south. This fracture quickly deepened into what historians call the rule of the dukes. Instead of submitting to a central monarch, local military commanders hoarded taxes and troops for themselves, carving Italy up into dozens of independent territories. We can see the economic reality of this division in the currency they left behind. Looking closely at this stamped gold coin, it is clear that regional Lombard dukes were minting their own money, projecting their own economic power totally independent of the king. This structural fragmentation was compounded by a religious split between Arian and Catholic factions within the Lombard elite. They were fighting over theology and borders, leaving them unable to project a unified military threat across Europe. Sitting right in the middle of this divided peninsula were the Papal States. As later Lombard kings finally realized their mistake and attempted to unify Italy, this swath of territory around Rome became a massive physical block. Desperate to consolidate their borders, the Lombards eventually abandoned diplomacy and drove their armies directly into papal lands. Facing a hostile army at his doorstep, the Pope looked past the local Lombard dukes. He sent an urgent appeal across the Alps to the one power capable of saving him, the unified Catholic Franks. The Lombards' attempts to consolidate Italy through force ended up isolating them. By threatening the territory around Rome, they provided the Pope with a motive to ignore local politics and invite a foreign, unified army across the Alps to intervene. In 774, these two systems finally collided. Charlemagne led a unified Frankish army over the Alps, meeting a Lombard defense already fractured by internal rivalry. Charlemagne besieged the capital, deposed the final Lombard king, and claimed the Iron Crown of Lombardy for himself. He didn't simply conquer the territory, he absorbed the entire ruling apparatus into the Frankish state. In a single military campaign, a kingdom that had stood for 2 centuries ceased to exist. It proved that decentralized military might could not withstand a unified empire backed by a singular religious mandate. The Franks used this territory to establish the massive Carolingian Empire, anchoring Western Europe for centuries. Meanwhile, the former Lombard Kingdom remained fractured. The Italian peninsula became a collection of regional powers, unable to fully unify for another 1,000 years. The centuries following the fall of Rome were a brutal testing ground. The geographic borders and cultural fault lines of our modern world were drawn right here, heavily favoring those who mastered the synthesis of central rule and religious alliance.